This morning's prayer is by Reverend Lisa Bovey Kemper. Circle of Care. In religious community, we share our joys and triumphs, our sorrows, and our broken places. In this circle of care, we make space for the complexity of life, the myriad experiences that bless and break our hearts. The truth of human experience dictates that on any given day, we each come to the table with hearts in different places. It is especially so on this day, invented to honor women who nurture. In this circle of care, we honor the truth that mothering is not and never will be quantified in one single descriptor. Mothering can be elusive or infuriating, fulfilling or confusing, commonplace or triumphant. It exists in the everyday experiences of each person. There is no human being that is not connected to or disconnected from a mother. And so we honor the complexity of experience, writ large in flowered platitudes, but here in this space, laid bare, honoring the truth in each of our hearts. There is room for all in this circle. If you have carried a child or children, whether or not they came to be born, we see you. If you have fervently wished to do so and circumstances of fate made it impossible, we see you. If you love children we cannot see, whether because of death or estrangement, we see you. If you never wanted to be a mother, we see you. If you are happy to mother other people's children as an educator, an auntie, or a foster parent, we see you. If your mother hurt you, physically or emotionally, we see you. If you had no mother at all, we see you. If your mother is or was your best friend, we see you. If your gender says you are not a mother, and yet you take on the role of nurturer, we see you. If you wonder whether your mothering has been enough, we see you. And if yours is a different truth altogether, we honor your unspoken story. There is room for all in this circle, and we lift all of you up in our prayers today. May it be so today and always. Amen.
Manchester, New Hampshire, born and bred, blessed with a positive attitude second to none, embedded in an undying faith, despite the multiple challenges faced, growing up, growing in, growing old. My mother learned the art of motherhood in the field, in the trenches, as it were, working the mills, surviving the war, dealing with measles, mumps, and chickenpox in each of her 6 sons, boys spread apart by birth over 17 years. She met my dad on a dare from friends who challenged this drill team parader to steal a shy spectator's cigarettes. She swept them, he chased her, cherchait la femme, and in the process she got his attention, an act he continued to perform for 50 years to the eve of their golden anniversary when he lay down to rest from exhaustion. Mom rarely set foot on the dance floor, quite possibly out of deference to Dad, a man too short for Army standards, but a man with both feet on the ground. Yet, Mom consistently dances the dance of survival in everyday life, with moves more complex and adroit than the costumed performances of lithe ballerinas who practice for hours on stages of wood, attempting to capture a moment of grace for all time. In mothers, the music of everyday dancing resides in the heart, where the rhythms of everyday living begin, nurtured in sensuous pools of left quadrant brains, to emerge with elan in proper artistic behavior, moving the family forward with drill team astuteness. Hail, Mom, full of grace, poetry, faith, and devotion, you who sit with the Mother of God over breakfast each morning, discussing the treatment of sons by a world which uses and abuses, claims and spits out, because they are different, challenging, and reflective. Thus, two mothers compare the day that was with the day that is, and cast a hope-filled blessing on the day that is to be, confident that in the end, the hope of resurrection will defy the shroud of death, passing through it and beyond, leaving behind soiled cloth and an impression embedded in the faces of the pilgrims yet upon the dunes, that mothers hold a sacred intuition in their souls, reserved for those who suffer to give birth, who suffer to understand, who suffer in their helplessness to change the world. My mom will be the first to tell you I've gone overboard and left out countless details in these lines which would prove quickly and help all readers understand she's not a saint. She's a survivor and a mother and a senior citizen unwilling to throw in the towel to adversity. Her hands are ever reaching out to help. Her heart is ever letting go of senseless holding on to. Her spirit marches to a different drummer, reminiscent of a Schubert Ave Maria air. She reads, she cooks, she cherishes a homemade bread, a tale or two of angels, and a Christmas family get-together. When it's time to pray, she prays. When it's time to play, she plays. When it's time to plant, she plants. And when it's time to reap, she reaps. So march, Mom, march to the drum you hear. And dance, Mom, dance through life's many twists. Then shed, Mom, shed the baggage wrought with pain. And sing, Mom, sing of the faith that walks with God. And thanks, Mom. Thanks for all your gifts of life, of love, and of yourself.
Yeah. Here's what happened this month. The universe mothered to me for Mother's Day. I'll tell you what I mean by that in a minute. A tiny bit of backstory. There's a woman named Erica Hewitt who is a UU minister in Maine, and she runs a part of the Unitarian Universalist Association website called Worship Web. It's a great collection of worship resources, and I go there often to find readings and prayers and to get inspiration. And Erica asked a bunch of us ministers a few months back, if there is one service that you struggle with and would love to have a ready-made, interactive, intergenerational, inspiring worship service handed to you on, what service would you like that for? And dozens of ministers weighed in, and you know what almost all of them said? Mother's Day. I thought that was interesting because I've never really struggled with coming up with a Mother's Day service before. Of course, as my friend and colleague down the road likes to say to me, check back in year 15. I do know to be careful on a day like Mother's Day as a minister, because it can be a complex day for some people. There are those who are mothers themselves, who we honor on this day. those who have recently lost mothers, who are grieving on this day, those who have or had a really hard relationship with their moms, and those who never knew their moms. There are likely people present today who would have loved to be mothers but aren't, and those who are moms or grandmothers and who are struggling with that role. So I am very aware that all those stories are in the room right now. We mentioned earlier there's the very rich Julia Ward Howe story of founding Mother's Day as a day for peace. I've gone with that angle before. There are present-day Mother's Day justice movements that I have focused on. I also have my own mother and 2 grandmothers in their mid-90s still alive. I have great genes. And many great stories related to these mothers. Anyway, I've never particularly struggled with Mother's Day, but this has been a very busy spring, and there's been a lot going on, so when Erica posted her fabulous, ready-made, intergenerational, interactive service online a few weeks ago, I thought, excellent, let's do that. But then when I had some time set aside for worship planning and went to download the service, it wasn't there. So I wrote to her and said, Erica, did I dream that you posted resources for Mother's Day? Because I swear I saw them and now I don't find them. And she said, well, yes, I did post that service, but I'm actually getting it published soon, and my editor said that I was allowed to share it with 10 congregations, but no more, and 10 people have already claimed the service. So I've taken it down. Are you desperate? She asked me. Well, you never want to admit that you're desperate. No, I said. Not desperate. And I wasn't really. But I also didn't have a very clear plan B either. And then here's what happened. The universe mothered to me. All of a sudden, people started coming to me with Mother's Day resources. Unsolicited, unexpected, these gems from the universe just started to appear. So that opening prayer that I read, my colleague Lisa wrote that and posted it on Facebook the other day. And after service one Sunday, Roger and I were talking, and out of the blue he mentioned, you know, I have this poem that I wrote about my mother. And he graciously shared that wonderful piece with us this morning. And then one of my favorite authors, Sherman Alexie, posted a poem that he wrote about his mother the other day. And I was meeting with Ellen Anthony, and she said she had written something about mothering. And I was gathered with colleagues for worship at a retreat last week, and Reverend Anastasia Zink shared the most touching story that has just stayed with me and on my heart about her mother that I'd really like to share with you too. So that is how our Mother's Day service took shape this year. It may not be the most coherent service that you have ever been to, but it is an absolute gift. So please join me in being mothered to by these incredible worship elements that found us in our moment of need. First, some words by Sherman Alexie. For those of you who don't know his work, I hope you go and read some. He grew up on the Spokane Indian Reservation and now lives and writes in Seattle, Washington. My favorite collection of his stories is called 10 Little Indians, and I also love The Lone Ranger and Tonto, Fist Fight in Heaven. And that was adapted into a wonderful film that you might have seen called Smoke Signals. Here's his poem about his mother, entitled Eulogy. My mother was a dictionary. She was one of the last fluent speakers of our tribal language. She knew dozens of words that nobody else knew. When she died, We buried all those words with her. My mother was a dictionary. She knew words that had been spoken for thousands of years. She knew words that will never be spoken again. She knew songs that will never be sung again. She knew stories that will never be told again. My mother was a dictionary. My mother was a thesaurus. My mother was an encyclopedia. My mother never taught her children the tribal language. Oh, she taught us how to count to 10. Oh, she taught us how to say, I love you. Oh, she taught us how to say, listen to me. And of course, she taught us how to curse. My mother was a dictionary. She was one of the last 4 speakers of the tribal language. In a few years, the last surviving speakers, all elderly, will also be gone. There are younger Indians who speak a new version of the tribal language, but the last old-time speakers will be gone. My mother was a dictionary, but she never taught me the tribal language, and I never demanded to learn. My mother always said to me, English will be your best weapon. She was right. She was right. She was right. My mother was a dictionary. When she died, her children mourned her in English. My mother knew words that had been spoken for thousands of years. Sometimes, late at night, she would sing one of the old songs. She would lullaby us with ancient songs. We were lullabied by our ancestors. My mother was a dictionary. I own a cassette tape recorded in 1974. On that cassette, my mother speaks the tribal language. She's speaking the tribal language with her mother, Big Mom. And then they sing an ancient song. I haven't listened to that cassette tape in 2 decades. I don't want to risk snapping the tape in some old cassette player. And I don't want to risk letting anybody else transfer that tape to digital. My mother and grandmother's conversation doesn't belong in the cloud. That old song is too sacred for the internet. So as that cassette tape deteriorates, I know that it will soon be dead. Maybe I will bury it near my mother's grave. Maybe I will bury it at the base of the tombstone she shares with my father. Of course, I'm lying. I would never bury it where someone might find it. Stay away, archaeologists. Be gone, be gone. My mother was a dictionary. She knew words that have been spoken for thousands of years. She knew words that will never be spoken again. I wish I could build tombstones for each of those words. Maybe this poem is a tombstone. My mother was a dictionary. She spoke the old language, but she never taught me to say those ancient words. She always said to me, English will be your best weapon. She was right. She was right. She was right. Thank you, Sherman Alexie. And now I invite Ellen Anthony to share her poem, Transfer Station.
Transfer station. At the end, when the bundle of a person goes slack and the strings loosen and the contents spill out, then whoever has been waiting all this lifetime for the goods therein gets them. But you have to be there. You have to have been watching for as long as it takes for matter to dissolve. And when it does, you have to weather the hush, the whoosh of Spirit dispensing her gifts. Now, step forward. Catch the one quality you're willing to carry out in your own sack of time. No, that's not right. You don't have to wait for someone to die, or even be close by to allow the transfer of goodness from you to me, or me to you, even if we're strangers, even if we're still alive.
Thank you. Last, I share this personal story told to me in worship by Reverend Anastasia Zink. She shared it at our ministers' gathering and was also brave enough to share it with her congregation last year on Mother's Day. There are many wonderful things about my mother, she said. She taught me to deeply care for others, to be analytical in my reading of society, to pay attention to power dynamics, and to fiercely own my own power. She also had a mental illness, and at times her moods would shift rapidly. She would speak in angry and tormented ways about how others were trying to control or contain her. Anastasia and her mother lived alone in New York City, and her mother tried to make things work. She worked many jobs to pay the bills, but often couldn't maintain one job for very long. Bills went unpaid, and it was a very insecure time. Starting in the 3rd grade, Anastasia would go through the trash to find cans for recycling, not for environmental reasons, but to redeem the cans and help her mother budget and plan and pay for meals. Her mother would come home late at night, feeling tormented and ostracized, and Anastasia would sit with her in a dark room, cupping her mother's large hand in her small one, listening, holding, stroking, offering compassion. She would hold her mother's hand until she felt a release, paranoia relaxing into that still and quiet place. In this way, they journeyed through the difficult and dark times together. Anastasia survived this in part because she had a natural optimism, and in part because she had a real sense of her own capacity. She had the support of friends. School was a safe haven for her. It was often true that Anastasia's mom could get into a fury about something, and Anastasia would sometimes have to leave the house for days at a time. She would stay with friends or figure something else out until she felt she could return. There was one time in the 10th grade that Anastasia came home on a cold and wet day, and she took off her backpack and was taking off her sweater when her mother started screaming at her. She knew she would have to leave, so she grabbed her things and quickly left. She returned 3 days later, as she usually did. She just wanted to be home. She was a little nervous, but she thought she would go into her room and her mom could come to her when she was ready. But then her heart sank when she realized that she didn't have her keys. Now she would have to meet her mother at the doorway to get in. No neutral zone. So she sat on her neighbor's brownstone steps and waited and waited. She had a book, and she was reading it, and when she looked up, she saw that her mother was about to go into her building. She'd almost missed her. She jumped up and hurried to her and said, "Mom." And her mother turned toward her, and her face was the angriest, reddest, scrunched up, fiercest face that Anastasia had ever seen. She looked her daughter in the eye, called her a horrible name, and spit in her face. Anastasia let that settle deeply into her spirit as she watched her mother go into the building without her. And she staggered backwards toward the stoop she had been sitting on and began to cry, to weep. What does it mean, she wondered, to live without the love of one's mother? What does it mean to live in this world without that foundational love? She was simply undone. She had no more resources within her, and she sat there crying. After a while, she heard above her a voice say, "Are you all right?" And she looked up through her tears to see a figure silhouetted, dark and shadowy through a bright light. She almost heard trumpets. All she could think in her deeply skeptical, atheistic soul was, "Oh my God, it's an angel." She moved over on her step to make room for the angel, and a man sat down next to her. He said, "I know your mother." And those words washed over her a deep sense of being known and accepted. A deep sense of not having to explain away her life. That connection is offered even in the most heart-wrenching of spaces. The man didn't change her life, but somehow he gave her the strength and the connection she needed to go on. Often our mothers provide that deepest sense of connection, of being held. They offer us that foundation of being loved and belonging, and that sense that we can be anything we want to be in this world. That is a gift that many of us receive from our mothers. But Anastasia's story reminds us that even if we don't have that, we are still held. That's why I was happy to share the gifts of the universe with you today, because they point to a way that I have felt held this month. Anastasia says, "In my story, I found a deeper truth than I thought I knew existed. Though I am very capable," she says, "I have more resources to call on than I possess myself. When I fall, a great interdependent web of life will catch me and pull me back up. May it be so for each of us. And may this community be a place where you too feel held. Amen. And blessed be."